Most of you aren't subscribed. Make sure to subscribe, as it helps out the channel. Without further ado, starting the series at the Regardin Magical Academy, the most prestigious of all magical schools, we see our MC watching various students perform magic feats. As for our MC, someone who has no magical aptitude, we see him on the 7th floor of the dungeon, training and slaying monsters with his sword as it's the only way he can grow. In the capital of magic, Urubis Regardin, students attend the Regardin Magical Academy, all answering basic questions regarding the creation of sulfur by channeling magic into Balka or Aragni dust, and with the sulfur a flame can be created. Spearheading the class, Professor Edward Serfence ends up asking our MC, Will Seffert, a 6th-year student accompanied by his familiar, Kiki, to demonstrate such an act. Flustered, Will has no choice but to head to the front of the class, ordered by Edward to demonstrate the simple sulfur creation spell. With all his might, Will attempts to infuse the ore and dust with magic, but upon failing, the entire classroom erupts into laughter. Disappointed, Edward voices how studying the theory won't get Will far in life, even if Will is considered an honor student for note-taking only. Among the students, a sudden burst of flame ignites the ore and dust, producing a potent blue flame, but this prompts the professor to remind the students to demonstrate only when asked. Speaking up, Scion Ulster apologizes for the sudden display of magic, smirking as Scion mentions how they believe Will needed help with a basic demonstration. Regardless, Edward casts an ice spell to put out the flames, reminding his students that magic in this world reigns supreme, especially since the heroes of their worlds are mages. Hearing Edward suggest that Will leave that academy for being magicless, Will steps outside for a breather, but is confronted by Scion, Lyral and Gordon, mocking Will for training in the dungeon again. At the same time Colette appears, ordering Scion to stop bullying Will, but hearing that Colette calls Will one of her friends, Scion takes the chance to remind Will that achieving the status of a Magia Vander is out of reach for a normie like Will. With Scion and his friends leaving, Colette tries to cheer Will up, pointing out how weird it was for Professor Edward to make fun of Will in front of the entire class, but Will admits that it was fine since Edward was right about him having no magic. Will changes the topic by telling Colette how surprising it is for a cute girl to be helping him out, shocking Colette as she demands to know if Will calls every girl he sees cute. Apologizing for the sudden compliment, Colette shyly asks Will to give her a moment, reminding herself that Colette Loire is from a noble family and should behave as so. Seeing Will glaring off into the distance, Colette asks what Will is thinking, happy to see Will admire the beautiful Magia Vander, the wizards that hold up the sky. Written in history, there was a time when the world was enshrouded in darkness by the celestial host, up until 5 powerful wizards fought back against the evil, casting a seal that opened up the sky. The title of Magia Vander has since been passed down to only the strongest of wizards, but Colette wonders if the Ice Maiden's wand, Albus Vina, is watching over them as they speak, surprised to hear that Will believes so. Flashing back, we see a young Will speaking with a young girl, Elfaria. Will is amazed to hear Elfaria tell him stories about the sun and moon in the sky, both agreeing to become Magia Vander if it means they can scale the tower and see the sunset. Sadly, Will and Elfaria's promise was one-sided, with Elfaria becoming the youngest person to achieve the title of Magia Vander, ultimately leaving Will behind. Having not given up, Will promises to one day meet Elfaria at the top of the towers, but is brought back to reality when Professor Warkener Norgram screams at Will for being reckless and venturing into the 7th floor of the dungeon. Will apologizes for being reckless, but seeing as he did indeed bring back the bones of an evil guard, Warkener awards Will with 2 extra credit points, pleasing Will and Kiki as Will is making progress. Warkener asks if Will is truly trying to obtain the Magia Vander status, reminding Will that he still needs to advance to the Upper Institute, meaning Will has to work on his writing, spell work and praxis in order to obtain 12,000 credit points. Since Will has no magic, he'll have to make up for the loss of credit points, but when Will says he'll simply overload on praxis credit points, Warkener states that it's impossible for Will to advance at his current rate. Seeing Will sulking, Warkener tells Will that he needs to focus on graduating first, reminding Will that he still has 4 credit points to obtain by the end of the week. Surprised, Will instantly begins searching for a monster that will fetch him 4 credit points, but seeing Will struggling to find a suitable monster, Warkener hints at a possible sighting of a Baskerville on the 6th floor. Grateful for the suggestion, Will gives Warkener a massive hug, but having heard everything, Scion rushes towards the dungeon, dead set on ensuring Will doesn't graduate. Having made it to the 6th floor of the dungeon, Will gets excited, having faced a Baskerville before, but upon seeing Kiki getting nervous for their upcoming fight, Will promises to be wary of the monster's fire breath, begging Kiki to help track down the monster. At the same time, Scion and his lackeys are also seen hunting for the Baskerville, but Scion gets pissed hearing his lackeys get cold feet, scared to be facing a Baskerville for the first time. Scion states that Will is not fit to be in the academy, attempting to use search on the monster, but out of nowhere a different monster appears, pummeling and killing Gordon in an instant. Having heard a cry for help, Will and Kiki instantly dart towards the screams, peeking around a corner only to spot Scion facing off against a evil sentinel, a monster worth 10 credit points and is classified as an over 5 enemy. Will knows that the monster shouldn't exist within the 6th floor of the dungeon, watching as Scion helplessly exhausts his mana, attempting to wear down the creature, but no luck. Knowing that he should help Scion out, Will wonders if he should really be saving the person that bullied him, choosing to let Scion die, but out of nowhere Will remembers Elfaria's words. Elfaria had once handed Will some glasses, happy to see Will as a kind person, but in the present, Will equips said glasses revealing that he's only kind as he wants to stand and be with Elfaria. As the monster brings its blade down onto Scion, Will dashes forth, heroically blocking the creature's slash. At the same time, we see Edward storming into Werkner's office, reporting that Scion and his lackeys have been missing, having ventured into the dungeons, and Edward wants Werkner to look for them with his familiar. Upon hearing that Scion has ventured into the 6th floor of the dungeon, Werkner reassures Edward that they'll be fine, heading over to a crystal ball, stating that Will can resolve the issue. Having parried several of the monster's slashes, Will runs circles around the creature, managing to sever one of the monster fingers. Pissed, the creature blows Will back, firing several pieces of debris in Will's direction, but having increased his speed, Will disappears, impaling the monster from behind. Seeing Will's movements, Scion is unable to believe Will is so manly, but at the same time, Kiki is seen televising Will's actions through the crystal orb, shocking Edwards as Will isn't a normal human. Werkner reveals that Will has an abnormal physique, having superhuman strength in tune with dwarves along with the observational skill to analyze and overcome any attack once he's seen it. Having severed the creature's weapon-holding arm, heading to retrieve the monster's blade, taking a stance and countering the monster's breath of fire, with a lightning speed slash. Having decapitated the monster, Will checks to see if Scion is okay, but both Scion and Edward refuse to accept a magicless student like Will to be so capable. Having returned to Werkner, Will officially gains an additional 10 credit points. Flashing back 5 years, we see a 10-year-old Will, dreadfully walking through school, listening as his peers mock Will for being magicless, having been used to convince Elfaria into joining the same school, but now since Elfaria is a Magia Vander, Will is of no use. Brought to the headmaster's office by Werkner, the headmaster, Cauldron Anuve, senses something from Will. Handing Will a blade, Cauldron suddenly conjures several spells around Will, prompting Will to push Werkner out of the blast zone, only to begin destroying and evading the magical projectiles. Laughing out of joy, Cauldron states that she'll allow Will to remain a student, but Werkner is worried that Will won't make it far at the school. Cauldron says she's interested to see how Will can progress in life with just his sword, spotting Will break down as he demands to know if he can eventually catch up to Elfie. The headmaster admits that Will still has a chance, although it may be a rough journey. Stealing his resolve, Will agrees to climb the tower as is, impressing the headmaster, but Cauldron wonders how Will's life will be since his sword is meant to compete with wands. Heading to Werkner's class, Will is reminded that in order to advance to the top of the tower, students must first advance into the Upper Institute, and only the strongest within the Upper Institute will be given the title of Magia Vander. Werkner adds that there are 2 ways to advance into the Upper Institute. The first is by creating a new type of magic and the second is obtaining 7,200 credit points. Even though the first option isn't impossible, it's simply easier to obtain the credit points, but Werkner reminds everyone that the people in his supplementary class today are in danger of not graduating. Forced to sit through Werkner's supplementary exam, Colette comforts Will after the class, hearing that Werkner had forced the class to take several mock exams. Will does appreciate Werkner for looking after the dumber students like himself, something Colette knows Edward wouldn't even bother with. As the two turn a corner, they spot Scion and his lackeys surrounded by other students, all amazed to hear that Scion had managed to slay an evil sentinel by himself. With Gordon and Lyral alright after the monster encounter, the two began advocating for Scion to replace the top 3 students in their school, but Scion knows that it was really Will that easily slayed the evil sentinel. Just then, Scion spots Will passing by, immediately marching towards him only to grab Will by the collar as he refuses to accept a weakling like Will was so strong. Hearing Colette order Scion to stand down, Scion and his lackeys head off, leaving Colette to wonder why Scion hates Will so much. At the same time, we see Edward asking the headmaster to expel Will, confusing Cauldron as Will has already made it to his 6th year without any issue. Edwards declares that a warrior like Will shouldn't exist amongst mages, but Cauldron reminds Edward that Will's marks apart from magic are above average, and that Will has the option to become an artificer or a healer if he chooses. Sadly, both Edward and Cauldron agree that since Will is only fixated on obtaining the Magie Evander title, Will would be wasting his time at the academy, but as a compromise, Cauldron asks Edward to assign Will a test and expel Will if Will fails Edward's test. Smirking, Edward accepts, heading off as the Cauldron entrusts Edward the Dark Viper Mage to assess Will's capabilities fairly. Having headed to some nearby lockers, Will thanks Colette for helping him store his books, but Colette feels bad for Will as he has to keep his sword stored away whilst on campus. Will reveals that his roommate Rosti also doesn't want him carrying around his sword, so it's better for Will to store it away in both cases, but Will reassures Colette that Rosti and himself are still friends. Now at the study hall, Will begins reciting the history of a Dwarven war, surprising Colette as she wonders why Will is reviewing old material, but Will is simply practicing his writing skills, as he needs a perfect score to pass. Will says he understands how the dwarves felt during the Battle of Garzaronso, as the dwarves continued to fight against enemies with magic, relying on their determination to surpass even magic. Will says he too believes his determination will someday overcome his lack of magic, but Colette gets distracted, spotting a white hair of Will's head. Wanting to pluck the white hair, Colette and Will are interrupted by Edward, asking to speak with Will alone. Heading to the spell hall, Edward says that he'll be giving Will a supplementary class, instantly casting a dark spell that barely misses Will. Edward says Will needs to land a strike on him to pass, and Will must accept since Edward will award Will with 5 spellwork credit points if he succeeds, but Will be expelled if he fails. Getting serious, Edward begins channeling a potent spell, consuming Will with a magic circle. At the same time, Warkener arrives at the headmaster's office, watching as Edward begins barraging Will with spells, wondering why Edward has been assigned to test if Will is worthy of remaining a student. Cauldron wonders why Warkener is so against Will's expulsion, hearing Warkener reveal that Will is the closest to achieving the Magie Evander title, having already reached the top of the tower. As Will continues to evade Edward's low-tier dark magic, he's amazed at the sheer potency of said spells, attempting to rush Edward from behind, but fails to even damage Edward's magical barrier. Blown back, Will's glasses shatter, stunned to see Edward cast spells with no incantation. Racking his brain for a way to defeat Edward, Will hears that Edward will only use his black flames to attack and his magic barrier to defend. Just then, Edward begins conjuring several magic circles, overlapping them only to fire off several black flames at Will, bouncing Will around in the air, only to watch Will helplessly struggle to move, wishing he at least had his blade. At the same time, Colette is seen at the lockers, wondering what sort of kinky stuff Edward and Will could be doing, but just then Kiki crawls into the room, begging for Colette to retrieve Will's sword. Having exhausted Will, Edward begins marching towards Will, asking Will if he knows how many mages it took to overcome 10,000 dwarves during the Battle of Garzaronso. Hearing Will helplessly answer that it only took one mage, Edward stomps Will's head into the ground, reminding Will that magic reigns supreme in the world and that a sword can never compete with a wand. Even still, Will slowly gets up, shoving Edward away, as he declares that he won't stop trying until he can be with Elfie, the person he loves. Disgusted by Will's declaration, Colette suddenly arrives, tossing Will his blade. Equipping his goggles, Will unsheathes his blade, easily slicing through one of Edward's dark flame projectiles. Pissed, Edward traps Will with a flame wall, preparing multiple incantations, making Will shake as he fears he'll burn to death, but seeing as he must defeat Edward to achieve his dreams, Will prepares to risk it all. Charging towards Edward, Will is forced to evade and slice Edward's projectiles, remembering during the Battle of Garzaronso, a lone dwarf by the name of Gareth managed to land a blow on the mage that wiped out his brethren. Impressed by Gareth's feat, the mage ultimately recognized the dwarves as capable beings, something Will hopes to achieve as well, as he distracts Edward's with some debris. Using the explosion from Edward's magic, Will leaps into the air, firmly gripping his blade only to use his momentum to carve through Edward's barrier. When the smoke clears, Will has managed to scratch Edward's face, prompting Edward to leave as he declares Will has obtained 5 credit points for passing. With Will collapsing out of pure exhaustion, Colette rushes to Will's side, but at the same time Warkener is amazed that Will was able to come up with a strategy to conceal himself only to surprise Edward whilst in the midst of battle. As the headmaster praises Will's phenomenal performance, we cut to Rosti preparing dinner for Will and himself, wondering when Will get back. Flashing back, we see the last time Elfie and Will spoke to each other, with Elfie giving Will his signature goggles and Will declaring that he'll climb the tower and meet up with her. Grateful to hear that Will hasn't forgotten their promise of seeing the sunset together, Will has no choice but to watch Elfie leave, turning to Warkener and promising to be strong from here on out. In the present, Will is seen on his delivery job, swiftly delivering out papers, only to run into Donnan, who tells Will he'll be in Gina's tavern later. Grateful for the info, Will carries on with his deliveries, accidentally tripping and spilling the papers, but nonchalantly recollects the papers and Kiki whilst they are still mid-air. Having a closer look at the papers, Will is proud to see Elfie gain credibility for creating a new original magic, being the first to achieve the feat of inventing 12 magics. Reading more about Elfie, Will suddenly reads that the Upper Institute has passed a new order to the Academy involving Elfie, shocking Will. Rushing back to his dorm on the outskirts of the Academy, Will calls out to his roommate, Rosti Nauman, asking Rosti to make him a magic item. Curious as to why Will is so energetic, Will says that Elfie has requested an order, and Will plans on fulfilling since he doesn't have class today. Unveiling his ripped body, Will begins changing since he needs to go hunting for Frostwalker ice cores on the 4th floor, pleading with Rosti to help build him magic items. Happy to see Will is honest with his intentions, Rosti hands Will his inventions, amazing Will as Rosti lives up to the role of an artificer or mechanic inventor. Before Will leaves, Rosti shoves some food in Will's mouth, ordering Will to take care. History says that Mage Queen Mercedes once said that everything originates from the dungeons, encouraging future generations to explore and learn everything about the dungeons. Having made it to the 4th floor, Will and Kiki spot several students already hunting for ice cores, not surprised since it was Elfie herself that made the request. Out of nowhere, a massive boom can be heard, revealed to be Scion, who easily took out a Frostwalker with a single spell. Even though his lackeys praise him, Scion knows that the Frostwalkers are nothing compared to the Sentinel Will defeated, but seeing Scion so fired up, Will gets motivated and has no choice but to head deeper into the floor. Suddenly spotting a girl being cornered by several beasts, Will instantly equips his goggles, dashing forth as he slices up the creatures. Shocked to see a student slay creatures with a mere sword, the girl introduces herself as Iris Churchill, a 4th year. At the same time, we follow Warkener teaching a class containing Colette and Rose, learning that new magic created is normally named after the creator or words associated with the creator. Warkener reveals that Edward's dark magic spell Dax Darbicans is based off an ancient mage, Firewatchman Darbicans. Hearing Warkener encourage his students to invent magic of their own, Rose asks how amazing Elfaria is, since she was seen on the morning papers. Warkener holds back his excitement, stating that Elfaria is beyond amazing, having created 12 new spells, a feat that makes Elfaria one of the greatest to ever live. With students all acknowledging how amazing it must be to wield the ice affinity, Colette realizes how special Elfaria is, having wondered why Will was always chasing after her. Seeing Colette thinking about Will, Rose teases Colette, fearing that Will only cares about Elfaria, prompting Colette to defend herself, but Warkener scolds Rose and Colette for not paying attention in class. Back with Will and Iris, Iris mentions how she has heard rumors of the Magicless student, grateful to be finally meeting Will, surprising Will as a junior 2 years younger than him doesn't discriminate against him. Iris states that she could never hate someone that saved her life, flustering Will as Iris is quite gleeful, but Will learns that Iris is also here to fulfill Elfaria's request, hoping to become Magia Vander one day as well. Will reveals that the sky in their world isn't real, as it's the Magia Vander's role to create a barrier that protects them from the evil outside, and that the barrier itself creates the artificial sky. Deep in thought, Will suddenly hears Iris mention how she had already met Elfaria once, having been surrounded by various monsters in the dungeon and had given up. But out of nowhere, Elfaria arrived, freezing the surroundings only to rescue Iris, getting Iris excited at the mere thought of serving Elfaria in the future. As Iris continues to fangirl over Elfaria, Kiki and Will suddenly step aside, inspecting the frozen floor. At the same time, Iris mentions how she has failed to locate any Frostwalkers with her search spell, spotting Will acting strange. Upon asking what Will is doing, Will states that Frostwalkers normally leave behind a trail of ice fragments, but seeing as there is an ice fragment double the usual size in front of them, Will suspects that there is a powerful one nearby. Knowing that most people's search spells won't be able to reach the creature, Will begins heading deeper, forcing Iris to follow along, curious as to how Will knows all of this. Will states that his experience makes up for his lack of magic, but detecting movement in the corner of his eye, Will suddenly tackles Iris, both barely evading the boss's charge. Seeing the massive ice monster up and close, Iris recognizes the creature to be a Frostrex, the highest evolution of a Frostwalker, being worth 6 credit points, is an over 5 enemy and only exists on the 4th floor. Spotting the creature fire off an ice beam, Will dodges whilst carrying Iris, asking Iris to stay put as he faces the creature. Terrified, Iris reminds Will that the Frost Rex is immune to physical attacks, able to instantly freeze anything it touches, therefore it needs to be taken down by long-ranged magic attacks, as the Frost Rex is also known as the Dwarf Killer. Reassuring Iris that he's faced similar creatures before, Will equips Rosty's magical item, dashing towards the Frost Rex's ice beam only to evade it at the last minute. Running circles around the creature and even sliding under it, which forces the creature to begin firing off stray beams, prompting Iris to run for cover. Seeing an opening, Will tosses his magical rope item around the creature, running around and sliding under the creature, wrapping and tightening the item around the Frost Rex. Having tied up the creature, Will reveals that fire and explosions are the main weakness of the Frost Rex, watching as the creature emits his chilling aura. Before Will can freeze to death, Will activates the second part of his magic rope, igniting the rope that causes a massive explosion, all whilst vaporizing the creature. With Will grateful for Rosty's invention, Iris is seen shocked at Will's amazing feat, glaring at Will as she wonders how she will report what has just transpired. Seeing Will gleefully suggest they both leave now, Iris matches Will's gleeful energy, cutting to later that day where Iris is now in the Wizard Tower. Removing her disguise, Iris acknowledges Will as a creative warrior, opening a massive set of doors that lead to 5 thrones. Revealed to be the throne room of the 5 Magia Vander, Cariot and Cynthia Wiseman, Eleanor Leos Alf, Zio Thorsius Rybolt and Elfaria Albus Surfert. Iris apologizes for the intrusion, but Cariot reassures Iris that she's perfectly fine since they were only discussing how the threat of the celestial host looming above the sky will easily overwhelm their land if they choose to attack now. Knowing that they need more powerful people to avoid the lure during the fateful day, the Magia Vander asks the Watcher Iris if she has any new candidates in mind. Hearing Iris recommend Will Surfert, a Magicless student, Eleanor refuses all whilst Zio gets intrigued. Before Eleanor and Zio can argue, Cariot reminds everyone that the Grand Magic Festival is coming up, something the Magia Vander all agree to look forward to. With Zio, Eleanor and Cariot disappearing, Iris mentions how Elfaria was the one that asked Iris to observe Will, receiving the Ice Core Will retrieved only to ask that Will get stronger so they can finally reunite. With a practical day arriving, it's well known that students must obtain 12,000 credit points to advance into the Upper Institute. We see Scion uses fire magic to obtain 9,889 total points and Colette using her earth magic to obtain 7,340 total points. At the same time, Will struggles to slay his golem, preparing to throw a punch, but gets distracted when his fellow student mock him, falling to the ground as he is struck by the golem. Elsewhere, Lihana Awenzeus makes use of her lightning magic to achieve a total of 10,100 points. Wignall uses wind magic to gather 10,075 and finally Julius Reinberg manages to obtain a total of 10,048 with his unparalleled ice magic. Lihana acknowledges how strong Wignall and Julius is, watching as Julius declares Lihana and Wignall as his rivals, but as Julius hands the 2 ice rose, Lihana and Wignall simply shred the rose heading off as other onlookers watch knowing only those 3 are points above 10,000. Off to the side, Will grows more depressed, having only obtained 5,405 points, and only has 1 year left to achieve 12,000. Spotting Julius approaching, Will quickly gets out of his way, overhearing Julius and his lackeys mention the Grand Magic Festival. At lunch, Will asks Colette if she thinks he can win the sky race at the festival, but Colette advises Will to focus on the duels just like herself, since the elves will probably prioritize the sky race. Reasoning that his best chance to get scouted would be the duels, Will knows that everyone is probably thinking the same as himself. The Grand Magic Festival is an event held every 2 years, where various events are held to show off students' skills to high mages from the Upper Institute. Colette also takes the chance to remind Will of the 4 factions to look out for, these being the Lightning Lord's Wand, Thorsius Fash, the Sacred Elf's Wand, Elith Kanan, the Flame Emperor's Wand, Incendia Barum, the Ice Maiden's Wand, Albus Vina and finally the Light Sovereign Wand, Masteria's Noah. Colette begins dreaming of being picked by one of the Magia Vanders, since anyone picked can skip the requirements for graduation and simply move into the Upper Institute right away, but Will knows that it's never actually happened before. Colette also brings up the myths about the Watches, those who live amongst the students to help with scouting, but Will states that they shouldn't rely on an urban legend. Will states that he'll simply be helping with operations behind the scene, annoying Colette as she believes Will has potential, but Will points out that during his second year he was booed off stage for standing out too much. Colette does remember that year as the 50th festival and was also deemed the worst festival in history. With so many students outside training and honing their craft, Colette and Will grow more excited, both knowing that the Grand Magic Festival is their only chance to show off their skills, but Will knows he won't be doing anything to stand out this year as well. As Colette helps Will with retrieving his items, Colette suddenly detects something strange with a nearby locker, sensing that a barrier along with a sound-dampening spell has been cast. Not wanting to draw too much suspicion, Colette asks for Kiki's help, gleeful when Kiki easily breaks the spells. Upon opening the locker, the two are shocked to see a stairway leading downwards, ultimately discovering various students betting on who they believe will win each event in the Grand Magic Festival. At the same time, Will spots Scion and his lackeys agitating Scion, but before Scion can do anything, Colette threatens to hurt Scion. Will wonders why Scion of all people are participating in the illegal gambling, but Scion's lackeys explains that Scion was simply curious as to who has the most attention, annoyed that Scion isn't amongst the top 3. Pissed, Scion orders his lackeys to be quiet, shouting that he isn't as weak as everyone thinks and in terms of technical prowess he is as strong as the top 3 and he simply lost points during the writing exams. That evening, Will wraps up his final class for the day, heading out, but is stopped by Colette who offers to join Will in his dungeon training. Sadly, Will states that he'll be working at Miss Gina's tavern, annoying Colette as she gets flustered. Located on Slumland Street on the outskirts of the capital of magic, Miss Gina's tavern is filled with dwarves daily, run by Gina herself who cooks whilst Will serves their customers. Serving Mr. Donnan feels bad for Will as Will has to work his newspaper delivery job in the morning, student during the day and Miss Gina's tavern at night. Will reassures Donnan that he's been doing fine, especially since he has to pay off his tuition, but Will is scolded for slacking off, watching as Rosti flawlessly serves the customers. It's revealed that Rosti is helping out in the tavern since one of Gina's regular employees quit, but the dwarves could care less as they consider Will as one of their own. That night, Will and Rosti begin cleaning up, but Rosti asks if Will is truly okay with being paid so low for his efforts, asking why Will doesn't ask Warkener to help find him a better job. Will reveals that he doesn't want to bother Warkener further, and plus Will feels at home working amongst the dwarves that don't shame him for his shortcomings. Just then, Julius and his men enter the tavern, mocking the disgusting sight and smell of the tavern, but this makes Gina and Donnan glare at Julius. Spotting Will as a server, Julius begins to crack up, pissing Will off, but Donnan gets annoyed asking Julius to repeat himself. Arrogantly, Julius reminds Donnan that dwarves are an inferior race, having moved to their world when a celestial host destroyed the dwarves' world. In this world, dwarves are not treated equally unlike elves, and this forces dwarves to hold themselves back fearing a punishment for harming mages. As Rosti serves Julius and his men beverages and a bean dish, Julius and his lackeys begin laughing and taunting the dwarves, ordering them to leave their world, but Will couldn't hold back any longer, demanding that Julius and his men apologize. Will explains that the bean dish before them was something that has been passed on from generations of dwarven history, but Julius could care less, flinging the dish into Will's shirt. Seeing Will beginning to move, Julia's 2 lackeys suggest that Will not try anything, but in an instant, Will smashes the 2 into the ground, knocking them out. Having been caught in the crossfire, Julius gets real angry, beginning to consume the tavern in his ice magic. With a flick of his wand, ice spikes begin chasing after Will, barely missing his eyes and instead taking off Will's glasses. Sadly, Julius has the upper hand, pinning Will to the tavern walls, but before Rotzi can intervene, Julius stops ordering Will to enter the tournament where Julius and Will can fight for real. As Donna diffuses the situation, Julius declares he'll embarrass Will in front of everyone whereas Will states that he'll make Julius apologize for mocking the dwarves. With the day of the Magic Festival arriving, we see Will determined to do his best, all whilst Headmaster Cauldron announces the official opening of the school festival. With fireworks being lit, we see various scouts already looking for possible candidates, but as we pan into the skies, we see Lihana taking the lead in the dragon race. With her peers not surprised by Lihana's amazing performance, we cut to Cauldron praising the upper towers for having their scouts integrate into the crowd without too much issue. Iris proudly states that they are simply searching for talented students. As Lihana breaks and defends her sky racing title, Iris apologizes as he has business to tend to, hinting at the fact that she needs to cheer someone on. Following Scion, we see his lackeys cheering him on for the Crown Attack event, but Scion is seen rushing somewhere, revealed to have been asked by Colette to join her team. Excited to be alone with Colette, Scion suddenly realizes that Will is on their team, reminded by Colette that their team must have a total of 21,000 points to compete in the Crown Attack. When Scion demands to know why he should help Will out, Will looks past Scion, glaring at Julius who has just entered the same room. Pissed, Scion learns that Julius and Will apparently have some beef, but as the afternoon events are starting we cut to Mike Myas, the 6th-year student in charge of commentating. Mike also announces Edwards as his co-host, annoyed at first, but is forced to put up with Edward as a guest announcer. Announcing the Crown Attack event, Mike has several elves prepare the domain for the next event, all watching as the elves make use of several elemental affinities to create a playing field consisting of a volcano zone, a marshland zone, a badlands zone, a grassland zone and a woodland zone. Mike states that participants will start in 3 party teams scattered around the arena, all tasked with making their way to the central arena, where the first team to claim the crown wins. Of course, the announcer reveals that there have been various traps scattered all across the lands, encouraging students to find the shortest path to the crown if they dare, and that teams can obscure other teams. Edward adds that the overall test examines students' abilities to navigate through irregular landscapes, just like in the dungeons, something the scouts will be interested in seeing. Mike mentions how the crowd favorites to win are Squad 12 led by Wignall along with Squad 9 led by Julius, but Mike does point out Will's Squad 6, the team least popular. As the crowd mocks Will for even signing up for such an event, the teams head out to their assigned positions, but Warkener gets horrified realizing that Will is participating as one of the teams. Warkener rushes to warn Will about how unfair the event will be for him, but even Warkener is surprised by Will's serious demeanor, unable to change Will's mind once he has made up his mind. With all teams scattered and ready, the event begins, prompting everyone to begin rushing towards the arena. Following Julius's team, we see the mysterious boxes scattered in their surroundings transform into golems, the first obstacle all teams will have to overcome. Following Will, Mike is surprised to see Will's squad rushing towards their golems, prompting all the students to mock Will's suicidal strategy. Calling out to Colette, Will has Colette enchant his gauntlet with earth magic, throwing a punch at a single golem which sends it flying into one of the school's observatory drones. With everyone completely baffled by Will's display of strength, something Warkener knew was going to happen, as Will with his gauntlet is just as capable as a mage with his wand. As Mike announces Will as the first team to break through the golem swarm, Scion begins scolding himself for allowing a nobody like Will to save him in the dungeon, pissed that even at his level, he seems to be inferior to Will in every way. Moving on to the wastelands, Will's squad are faced by a series of other boxes, all firing earth projectiles towards the squad. Using his gauntlet, Will slams the ground, creating a temporary barrier, only to dash forward, once again relying on Colette to conjure several blades for him. Running towards the boxes, Will begins tossing the blades to shatter the boxes, nonchalantly clearing the second stage, shocking onlookers as they refuse to accept Will has been hiding his power all this time. Edward announces that since Will spends most of his time in the dungeons, Edward is not surprised by Will's keen battle senses, something that makes Iris cheer for Will loudly. As several parties hear word that Will's is passing each stage with ease, they rush to catch up, but eventually they begin to slowly fall to the dangerous traps within each stage. Following Julius's squad, Julius gets annoyed hearing that Will has taken the lead, choosing to go ahead and stop him. As Will's squad reaches the final stage of the Enchanted Woods, Will suddenly notices that the forest has been laced with chain traps, forcing Will to unearth the spells, easily having them cancel each other out. Seeing as Edward was the one that designed the chain traps, Mike asks for Edward's take on Will's solution to his trap, but Edward simply clicks his tongue annoyed. Having made it almost through the forest, Will knows that they'll start fighting other teams but reasons that he should take the opportunity to cut off Julius's team and ambush them. Out of nowhere an ice spell pierces Will, but luckily it barely misses Will's torso, shocking Will as he wonders how Julius reached the forest before them. Wondering where Julius's team is, but as Julius charges up several ice projectiles, Will quickly dodges, choosing to face Julius here and now. At that exact moment, a massive burst of flame can be felt from behind, revealed to be Scion, who is tired of standing idly by. Chanting a long spell, Scion aims his spell towards Julius, but realizing that Will is in the way, Colette barely manages to erect an earth barrier, barely blocking Will from the crossfire. As Will checks for any damage, Scion orders for Julius to leave Will to him, demanding that Will and himself finally have their one-on-one duel. Confused, Will demands to know why Scion is acting like this out of nowhere, but as Colette tries to stop the two boys from fighting, Julius separates Colette from the others with a massive ice wall, revealed to have survived Scion's devastating fire spell. With no other choice, Will retrieves a blade, standing off against Scion, who seems to be his next obstacle. Flashing back to a younger Will, we see him mocked by others with a piece of paper on his back, but seeing the poor sight of Will, Scion had actually helped Will by removing the paper attached to his back. Scion had even offered Will to join as one of his lackeys, but was terrified to see Will's cold expression, pissed that the weakest Will only dreamed of reaching whoever was on top of the tower. In the present, Will weaves through trees to avoid Sion's fireballs, but Sion increases the difficulty by having his fire weave through the forest, ultimately snatching Will up with a bind. Luckily Will is able to cut himself free, but this enrages Sion, as he orders Will to fight him. Still hesitant, Will states that he must make Julius apologize to Donald and the others, but Sion could care less, firing off more projectiles whilst Will searches for alternative solutions. At the same time, Mike commentates on how silly Sion and Will's brawl is, asking for Edward's opinion, only to get weirded out seeing how happy Edward is. Having seen everything transpire, most of the scouts note how Will's squad is being caught up in some unnecessary fighting, all disappointed to see Sion lose his temper. Following Rosti, we see him and Kiki grow concerned at Will's situation, suddenly noticing Iris appear, greeting her as they seem to know each other. As Iris sits beside Rosti, she cheers loudly for Will, surprising Rosti as he learns that Iris is completely obsessed with Will. Jealous Rosti mentions how Will is so popular, having always been on Will's side since they became roommates, but Rosti also mentions how they suspect Colette may also fancy Will. Cutting to Colette, she's seen running from Julius's ice projectiles, pissed to hear Julius tease her for having the Earth Princess title, but Colette is caught off guard when Julius sets off one of Edward's traps. In the arena, the crowd all suddenly gasp, realizing that there are multiple Juliuses, watching as Julius appears in front of multiple teams all confronting them. Surprised that Julius fulfilled his promise, Wignall gleefully greets Julius, but with a wave of his wand, Wignall shreds the Julius clone before him, surprised to learn that Julius had pulled off one of the Magia Vander's original spells. As the crowd goes wild, believing that Wignall had defeated Julius instantly, we cut to two mysterious elves, Filvis and Lefia, both criticizing Wignall for his subpar magic. In the stands, Sion's lackeys also begin to wonder why Sion hates Will so much, believing that there may be an alternative motive, especially if Sion was willing to give up his team's lead in the tournament. Back with Will, he's seen still standing, racking his brain for the reason Sion hates him so much. Flashing back, we follow the memories of Will from when he was younger, constantly bullied but Will never wanted anyone to accept him, especially not Sion, as all Will cared about was reaching his goal of reuniting with Elfie. In the present, Sion unleashes a powerful projectile, making some time for him to begin a powerful incantation, only to call forth his Flame Guardian Falcon. Sending forth his guardian, Sion watches as Will leaps into the air, all whilst severing the guardian's wings, but as Will makes a dash towards Sion, Will suddenly spots the guardian regenerating. Making note of the guardian's core, Will realizes that he's now pinned between Sion and the guardian's fire projectiles. Will chooses to evade one only to block the other with his gauntlet. Will also realizes that most guardians are meant to defend and protect a mage whilst they prepare incantations, but Sion's guardian seems to be overly offensive. In the stands, Edward is shocked to see how proficient Sion's magic is, amazed that a mere student is capable of summoning a guardian. At the same time, one of the fire scouts, Raj, asks for Sion's background, learning that Sion belongs to the Ulster house. Raj admits that at first glance, Sion falls short of top 3 in the school based on his school stats, but thanks to the festival, they now can report Sion as a possible candidate to carry it. Having dispelled his guardian, Will commends Sion for growing stronger since they last met, but Sion still hasn't had enough, knowing that Will still isn't taking the battle seriously as when he slayed the evil sentinel. Hearing Will states that they have no reason to fight, Sion grows infuriated, demanding to know why Will doesn't hate him, but Will corrects Sion, stating that of course he hates Sion along with everyone that bullied him, but right now he has to defeat Julius. Even more annoyed, Sion states that he doesn't care who or what Will is, all he cares about is being treated with respect, making Will realize what Sion wants. Apologizing for not taking the fight seriously, Will finally puts on his goggles, choosing to respect Sion by going all out. Finally pleased, Sion calls for his guardian once more, ordering the guardian to charge all whilst Sion layers multiple fire spells onto Will. Knowing that he won't win by running away, Will chooses to take a leap of faith, running towards the danger, only to dodge the guardian's pathing and Sion's projectiles. Having already learned the guardian's pathing, Will manages to pierce the guardian's core, finally heading straight for the source of the danger. As Sion and Will prepare to bet the duel on this final attack, a massive stone wall suddenly falls to separate them, revealed to be Colette. Colette scolds the boys for still fighting, revealing that she had managed to defeat Julius's clone, but Sion is more flustered seeing Colette's clothes all torn up. Colette tells Will to hurry towards the arena and face Julius, stopping Sion from interfering, but this earns Colette a thanks along with Will's jacket, embarrassing Colette. As Will promises to have a rematch with Sion, We cut to the stadium where Mike announces Julius as the first team to make it to the arena. But before Julius can claim the throne, Will appears, leaping over the stadium only to challenge Julius to a one-on-one. Cutting to Elfaria up in the wizard's tower, Sarissa her maid scolds Elfaria for quietly sneaking a nap, only to slap Elfaria awake. Sarissa asks that Elfaria take her Magia Vander duties more seriously, secretly annoyed that Elfaria isn't fit to be one of the elites, but nonetheless Sarissa asks Elfaria to look through the selection of students the Ice Scouts have found. First, Elfaria checks out Julius, a name everyone has made note of, something Elfaria believes will have to be her eventual successor. Back in the stadium, Will begins to circle Julius's squad, impressing Julius as he admits that he's surprised Will even caught up to him. As Julius conjures an ice rose, he gets excited at the thought of humiliating Will, but Will equips his goggles, stating that he'll have Julius apologize before he defeats Julius. Making the first move, Julius shatters his ice rose, swiftly creating a smokescreen that surrounds Will. Standing guard, Will wonders if Julius will go for a direct attack, but upon calming himself, Will detects 3 separate vibrations in the ground, deducing that Julius's team intends to surround him. Out of nowhere a massive ice projectile appears from behind, forcing Will to continuously dodge, reasoning that he'll be able to determine the positions based on the direction of the ice projectiles. Having evaded 3 projectiles, Will now has the positions of his 3 targets, spotting Julius only to leap towards him. Sadly, another projectile flies towards him, knocking Will out of his trajectory, as he suddenly realizes that Julius's team hasn't moved an inch. As the smoke clears, it's revealed that there are 4 Julius clones, but as the clones slowly march towards Will, Julius mentions how his clones explode, suddenly erupting as one of the clones encases Will in ice. Mortified at what has just transpired, both Edward and Warkener both recognize Julius's clone magic as one of the 12 ice spells Elfaria invented. Pissed, Will demands to know how a mere student can learn one of Elfaria's secret spells, but Julius states that his mere talent allowed him to mimic one of Elfaria's Magia Vander spells, mocking Elfaria for being not that talented. Infuriated, Will breaks out of the ice, lunging at Julius, but Julius simply waves his wand, launching an ice projectile to slow Will down. Simultaneously, Julius's clones also begin barraging Will with projectiles, forcing Will to remain stationary and defend. As Julius's members begin mocking Will's pathetic attempt, Julius chooses to unveil another one of his spells, having his 3 remaining clones suddenly blast Will with beams of ice, ultimately trapping Will in an ice pyramid. Realizing that he has nowhere to run, Will watches as Julius prepares to crush Will with a massive ice obstacle, hopelessly watching as his dreams are crushed. As the crowd goes silent from Julius's dazzling display of magecraft, Mike and Edward praise Julius for defeating his opponent without taking a step. Resummoning his clones, Julius marches towards the center of the arena, announcing himself as Elfaria's successor, but both Iris and Rosti both mock Julius for underestimating his opponent, shocking Julius as he realizes Will is still alive. Having carved his way out of the ice, Will thanks Julius for calming him down, admitting that he wasn't thinking because Julius had made fun of Elfie. Angered that Will is still standing, Julius's group along with Julius's clones all launch ice projectiles in Will's direction, suddenly disappearing only to appear behind Julius's team. As Will knocks out Julius's 2 group members, Will states that Julius's clone magic is nowhere near perfect. Seeing all of this, Edward recognizes Will's movements as the same tactics he used against him, having used a mage's magic to hide, only to attack from their blind spot. With the crowd shocked by Will's movements, Julius's clones suddenly crumble into ice, leading Will to announce that Julius needed his teammates to control his ice clones. Will Julius not denying that fact, Will takes the chance to point out how superior Elfie is, cutting to Elfie who states that although Julius is the most qualified to be her successor, Elfaria boldly claims that she rather prefers swordsmen by her side. Now facing off against each other, Will also deduces that Julius's clone magic must be actively monitored unlike Guardian summons, therefore Julius is not as capable as he makes himself to be. Pissed that nobody is lecturing him, Julius once again blasts Will with some ice magic, giving himself time to summon back his clones. As the clones begin firing of projectiles, this time Will is able to nonchalantly read the clones' intentions, evading each projectile. Following Julius, he admits that he can only control 4 clones at once, forced to stay on the defense without his teammates' help, but Julius has no fear since each clone is an exact copy of himself. Sadly, Will manages to scan his surroundings, appearing in front of the real Julius, terrifying him as he tries to block Will off. With a single swing, Will breaks Julius's defenses, bringing Julius to his knees. Demanding to know how Will found him so easily, Will reveals that although Julius's clones are meant to be exact replicas of Julius down to the body temperature, if the clones aren't monitored and controlled properly, the internal temperature of the clones drop, leading ice crystals to appear below the clones. Annoyed that a nobody knows his ice spell better than himself, Julius wonders how Will knows so much, leading Will to explain that since both Will and Elfie were both orphans, Will spent tons of time studying and learning Elfie's ice magic. With both Will and Elfie temporarily locking eyes, Julius refuses to believe a peasant like Will would be acquainted with Elfaria the Magia Vander, but when Will cuts down Julius's final attempt at attacking Will, Julius falls to his knees defeated. Will admits that Julius is the first to ever replicate Elfie's magic, but Will reveals that Elfaria's clone magic is a spell Elfaria invented when she was 2 years old, shocking Julius. Will states that even a powerful spell will have its weakness, scolding Julius for declaring himself as an emperor when he has mastered a spell someone invented when they were only 2 years of age. Laughing out of joy, Julius grows infuriated, letting out a burst of mana as he summons 8 clones this time. Ignoring the control issues, Julius chooses to overwhelm Will with rogue spells, but Will adds that he was once attacked by 10 Elfie clones. Letting loose, Julius orders his clones to attack, but in a blink of an eye, Will dispatches one of 8 clones. Terrified, Julius begins to flee, but Will begins chasing Julius down, carving through the clones like butter, only to grip his fists, punching Julius directly in the face, knocking Julius out with a single punch. As the crowd erupts from disbelief, Lihana is seen making note of Will, but as Will prepares to claim the crown, he notices Wignall and his team have snuck their way to the crown, claiming the crown as Wignall's squad is deemed the victor at Will's disbelief. Cutting to Elfie and Sarissa, Elfie is seen shaken, asking Sarissa if there are any spells to turn back time or to erase memories, but Sarissa states that those spells either do not exist or are forbidden. Unable to hold back her joy, Elfie states that she wants to watch and play with Will for eternity, weirding Sarissa out as Elfaria's dark side has just been revealed. Having accepted his defeat, Will sits beside the crown stand, something Scion is shocked at as Will is even stronger than Julius himself, declaring that he'll be the first to defeat Will. With Colette breaking into tears at Will's accomplishment, Will is a little sad he didn't win, but is proud he kept his promise. Check out one of our other videos on the screen or in the info card above. Subscribe, like and comment.